There's a place in Montana where no birds sing, and no locals dare to stay after sunset. Hidden deep in the plains, surrounded by nothing but time and silence, lies a crumbling stone ranch untouched for over a century. They call it Old Stone Ranch, and they say it watches you back. No map lists it, no sign points to it, but everyone in the nearest town knows exactly where it is and what's said to haunt it. Whispers of a landowner who vanished without a trace. A dinner table still set for a meal that was never eaten. Footsteps echoing in empty rooms. And a figure seen at the second floor window long after the house was supposed to be empty. This isn't just a ghost story. This is a forgotten chapter of American history. And tonight, we're going to open it. So grab your flashlight, lock your doors, and listen closely because some stories weren't meant to be remembered. But once you've heard this one, you'll never forget it. There are places in this world that seem to resist time. Places where the air feels heavier, where even the wind chooses not to speak. Old Stone Ranch is one of those places. I first heard of it when I was 12 years old, sitting cross-legged on the hardwood floor of my grandfather's study. He was going through a box of old letters left behind by his grandfather, and he pulled out a brittle envelope sealed in wax. He held it for a long moment, just staring. Then he said something I'll never forget. This letter was never meant to be opened. He never explained what that meant. But I could see it in his eyes, the kind of silence that comes from remembering something you wish you didn't. I didn't think much of it at the time, but as I grew older, that image haunted me. A sealed letter, a place no one talks about, and the strange way my grandfather would go quiet anytime someone mentioned the old ranch land north of Miles City. It wasn't until he passed that I found the letter again, hidden inside an old leather journal, wrapped in cloth as if someone was trying to keep whatever was inside contained. It was a journal entry from 1903, written by my great-great-grandfather. His name was Elias Mercer, and he had worked as a ranch hand in eastern Montana during the cattle boom. The entry was dated August 11th, and the handwriting was rushed, shaky. It read, "Harland is gone. Disappeared last night after the thunder. No signs of struggle. Just gone. The house feels wrong. The stones whisper at night. I'm leaving. If you find this, don't stay." Burn the place, that was all. No signature, no explanation. Just a warning. Naturally, I was curious. Too curious, so I started digging. And the deeper I went, the more questions I uncovered. Records show that the ranch belonged to a man named Josiah Harland, a wealthy landowner known for his discipline and harsh leadership. In 1902, Harland's entire household, including 2 workers and a cook, simply vanished. No bodies, no signs of fire. Just a rotting house left behind with everything still in place. Plates still on the table, clothes still folded in trunks, even a half-written letter still sitting in the study. Never sent. Some say the land was cursed long before Harland bought it, that native tribes avoided that patch of earth for generations, calling it a place where stone remembers death. Others claim Harland himself dabbled in things better left alone, occult books, strange symbols carved into basement walls. But there was one detail that unsettled me the most. Every photo of the house, no matter who took it, no matter the angle, always showed a figure in the second-story window. Faded, blurred, just watching. They say no one's been inside since 1947. But I was about to change that. There are stories so old, so dust-covered by time, that people start calling them legends. They get passed down in fragments, like broken glass scattered through generations. But behind every so-called legend, there's usually a truth uncomfortable, sharp, and waiting to be stepped on. Josiah Harland's story was one of them. According to old township records I managed to pull from a dusty county archive, Josiah purchased the land in 1894. He was already wealthy by then, a man of ambition, not origin. Some said he made his fortune in railroads, others whispered about gambling, mining, or worse. Whatever the truth, Josiah didn't come to Montana to retire. He came to build a legacy. He constructed the Old Stone Ranch using limestone quarried from nearby bluffs. It was a strange choice, considering most ranches back then were built from timber. But Harland insisted on stone walls nearly 2 feet thick, sealed tight as a vault. He hired local workers, but very few stayed long. The pay was high, but so were the walkouts. One man later testified that the house moaned at night like a wounded animal. Others claimed to see faces in the stone when the moonlight hit just right. By 1902, Harlan lived there with a small staff as cook, a young couple who worked the stables, and a housekeeper named Margaret. Then one night in November, they all vanished. No trace. Not a bloodstain, not a broken lock, not a set of footprints. The front gate was open. The horses were still in the barn. The dinner table was set untouched. A roast, blackened and cold, sat waiting on a silver platter. The local sheriff, a man named Elmore Ray, investigated for 3 weeks. He found nothing. In his final report, he wrote, "House shows no sign of struggle. Appears frozen in time. Locals refuse to return. Recommend the property be condemned." And that's exactly what happened. The ranch was boarded up and left to rot. Over the years, it was inherited by distant relatives, forgotten in wills, and eventually lost in legal limbo. But the stories didn't stop. One tale in particular caught my attention. It came from a woman named June Halbrook, who lived in Miles City and had worked for the post office in the 1960s. She told me she once delivered a registered parcel to a man claiming to live at Old Stone Ranch. He was polite, she said, but his voice was strange, like he hadn't spoken in years. June remembered driving out to the property. The house was in ruins, but the man stood on the porch in a dark suit, perfectly clean. He accepted the parcel, nodded, and said, "She's still singing, you know." But only at night. June said she never delivered there again. When I asked her what he meant, she just looked at me, dead serious, and said, "Sometimes, when the wind's right, you can hear a woman humming way out across the flats. And if you listen too long, you dream of her face. And her eyes are always wrong." There's no way to prove any of this, of course. That's the trouble with ghost stories. They never sign their name. But still, the journal, the photos, the records, they all pointed to one truth. Something happened at Old Stone Ranch, and it left a scar. And so, one overcast morning in late October, I packed a camera, a flashlight, 2 thermoses of coffee, and my great-great-grandfather's journal. I drove north until the road turned to gravel, and gravel turned to silence. My phone lost signal an hour before I reached the ranch. Not that I expected to need it. As the ranch came into view, I felt something I still can't explain. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was more like reverence. The house rose out of the prairie like a tombstone. Weathered stone walls stood stubborn against the wind, though parts of the roof had collapsed. Dead grass hissed beneath my boots. A crow circled overhead and then flew off like even it didn't want to stick around. I stood at the iron gate for a long moment, just watching. No movement, no noise, just the creaking sound of metal as I pushed the gate open and stepped inside. The air changed the second I crossed the threshold. Heavier, quieter, like I had passed through something invisible. I moved slowly toward the front steps. The porch sagged under my weight. The front door was slightly ajar, hanging crooked on its hinges. I pushed it open, and for a moment, it felt like I had stepped back in time. The interior was dusty, but mostly intact. The furniture had been covered in white sheets, now yellowed and brittle. A cracked mirror reflected my flashlight beam like a warped memory. The wallpaper peeled in long curls, revealing more of that cold, gray stone underneath. I entered the dining room. The table was still set. Plates, silverware, a wine glass cracked clean down the middle. I reached out and touched a chair. The wood felt cold as if it had just been left moments ago. That's when I heard it. A soft knock. 3 taps. Upstairs. Then silence. I stood there frozen, my breath shallow, my heart thudding so loud I could hear it in my ears. Another knock, this time slower. 2 beats, it wasn't the wind. I turned toward the staircase. It was steep and narrow, the banister half broken. My flashlight flickered just once, but it was enough to unsettle me. Still, I climbed. The air on the 2nd floor was colder, and it smelled faintly of lavender and mildew. There were 3 doors, 2 bedrooms, and what I assumed was a study. The first bedroom was empty. The second held something I didn't expect. A child's crib, covered in dust. Empty, but recently disturbed, like something had shifted inside it. And scrawled on the wall, barely visible through the faded paint, were the words, "I told you not to sing." At that point, I should have left. But I didn't. I opened the final door, and that's when I saw it. A desk, a torn journal, a broken quill, and on the floor, a long shadow stretching toward me, cast by nothing. Then the door slammed shut behind me, and I wasn't alone. The door slammed so violently that dust rained down from the ceiling. The sound echoed through the house like a final verdict. I stood frozen in the study, flashlight beam trembling slightly in my hand. There was no wind, no draft, just the thick weight of silence, and something beneath it. A vibration almost too low to hear, like a hum buried in the walls, growing louder the longer I stood there. I turned slowly, shining my light across the room. It was exactly as the journal described. The desk stood near the window facing the plains. A heavy oak thing, deeply scratched and scarred by time. On top of it lay a torn book with pages curled and faded, its spine cracked open like a wound. Beside it, a fountain pen lay dry, the tip stained dark red. I approached the desk and opened the journal. The last few entries were illegible, written in jagged, frantic strokes. But one phrase stood out, etched harder than the rest. "She sings from the stones." The same phrase I'd read on the nursery wall downstairs. I didn't know what it meant, not yet, but the repetition chilled me more than anything else in that house so far. Then, the humming began. Faint, almost gentle. It started so softly I thought it might have been the wind slipping through the cracks in the old stone walls. But no, this was something else. It was melodic, childlike. A woman's voice, lilting and slow, as if someone were rocking a baby to sleep in another room. I turned toward the sound, and the flashlight flickered again. This time it didn't come back on. I smacked it against my palm, then against the wall. Nothing. I was plunged into darkness. Only the sound of that humming remained, floating like fog. I took a step backward and felt the floor shift beneath me. A hollow groan of wood, followed by a loud, splintering crack. Then I fell. It wasn't far, just enough to knock the wind out of me. I landed in what must have been a crawl space beneath the floor. The air down there was suffocating. Damp, cold. I could barely see anything, but a faint light glowed from behind a broken panel in the wall. I crawled toward it, not thinking, just moving. The smell hit me first. Earth, old wood, and something worse, something sweet and rotted. Behind the panel was a hollow chamber, no more than 6 feet deep and 4 feet wide. And inside, piled against the back wall, were dozens of dolls. Ragged, cracked, some missing eyes, others dressed in faded lace. All of them were facing the wall except one. A porcelain doll with black, glassy eyes stared directly at me, and pressed to its lips was a child's finger held in a shh gesture. The humming grew louder. I scrambled back through the crawl space, heart hammering. The air felt wrong, thick, pressed against me like hands. As I climbed out of the hole, I felt something brush the back of my neck, feathery, soft, like fingertips grazing skin. I didn't look back. I ran, through the hall, down the staircase, across the foyer. The front door refused to open. I yanked and twisted the knob until it nearly snapped in my hands. Then the whispering began. It came from the walls. Not words, but sounds. Syllables curling at the edge of meaning. Like someone speaking just below understanding. I turned and saw the dining room table. The plates were shattered now. The wine glass spilled, red liquid bleeding across the wood like fresh blood. And at the head of the table, where the dust had been untouched before, there was now a deep impression. Like someone had been sitting there, watching. I backed away slowly until I felt the cold of the stone wall at my back. And then, everything stopped. The humming, the whispers, the vibration, silence returned, heavy as a storm about to break. And that's when I heard a knock at the front door from the outside. 3 knocks, slow, steady. I hesitated. Who would be out here? I approached cautiously and opened the door just a crack. No one was there, just the wind and the long, flat emptiness of the Montana prairie. The sky was gray, clouds boiling on the horizon. I stepped out onto the porch, breathing hard, my chest tight. Then I looked down. At the base of the porch stairs, carved into the earth, were footprints. Small, bare, leading away from the house. And alongside them, carved into the dirt with impossible precision, were words. "She's not done singing." I looked up, and for a split second I saw her at the second-story window. A woman, backlit by shadow. Hair long and wild, her head tilted slightly as if listening. Her eyes locked with mine, and she smiled. The humming began again. But this time, it came from inside me. A memory I didn't own. A song I didn't know. And I realized something terrifying. Whatever lived in that house wasn't bound by walls. It had learned. It had listened. And now, it remembered me. I didn't sleep that night. Not even after driving 30 miles back to the nearest town, if you could even call 3 buildings and a gas pump a town. I sat in my truck, parked outside an empty laundromat, gripping the steering wheel until sunrise. But the humming never really stopped. It followed me like breath fog on glass unseen, but present. I told myself I imagined it, that the old house had gotten under my skin, that maybe I hadn't eaten enough, maybe I was dehydrated, maybe, God help me, maybe I was losing my mind. But then I opened my phone. My voice memo app was running, recording. It must have started while I was in the house, but I couldn't remember doing it. I hesitated a moment, then hit play. Static at first, the creaking of the house. My own voice muttering something unintelligible as I moved through the rooms. Then, at the 13-minute mark, a second voice. Soft, deliberate. A woman's voice, just behind mine, whispering, "You heard her. Now you're hers." My stomach turned to ice. I dropped the phone and stumbled out of the truck. The morning sun burning far too bright against my skin. The silence outside felt hollow-like. It had been scooped out and left behind, waiting for something to fill it. I needed answers, real answers. So I drove to the county archive and still in a battered little building that smelled of old glue and yellowing paper. The clerk was polite, but gave me a look like she'd seen one too many people come through chasing ghost stories. Still, when I mentioned the old stone ranch, she went quiet. "Been a long time since someone asked about that place," she said, reaching under the desk for a dusty file box. "You sure you want to read this stuff?" I nodded. She slid the box across the counter and walked away. Inside were faded newspaper clippings, handwritten letters, and several black and white photographs. One headline from 1924 caught my eye. "Local woman found dead in nursery declared suicide despite unexplained injuries." I pulled the article closer. Her name was Clara Whitmore, wife of Thomas Whitmore, the original builder of the ranch. The article described how neighbors hadn't seen Clara in weeks. When a hired hand finally broke into the house, he found her in the upstairs nursery kneeling before the cradle, lips stitched shut with black thread, eyes wide open. No needle, no blood, just thread, and that song. Multiple reports described a faint humming heard around the house for days before her death. I kept reading. Another clipping from 1951. A traveling preacher who stayed at the abandoned ranch was later found wandering along the highway barefoot, eyes sunburnt, mumbling about the stone singing to him in the dark. He vanished from the local asylum a week later. Never seen again. Another note, handwritten, dated 1972. "I don't know why I came back. The land is wrong. She is under the floor. I hear her crawling." By the time I closed the file box, my hands were shaking. I knew what I had to do. I had to return. But not out of curiosity anymore. Out of responsibility. Whatever was buried in that house had been waiting, watching, choosing. And now it had seen me, and worse, remembered me. As I pulled up to the ranch once more, the air felt charged, electric. The grass whispered as the wind stirred it, like the land itself was whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. The front door creaked open as I approached. I hadn't unlocked it. I stepped inside, and every board beneath my boots groaned like the house was waking up again. I moved slowly, flashlight steady this time. The walls pulsed faintly, as if the house itself was breathing. Back in the study, the journal was gone. In its place, on the desk, sat the porcelain doll from beneath the floorboards, still smiling, still holding its finger to its lips. But now the other hand was pointing toward the fireplace. I knelt and ran my hand along the stones. One of them shifted. Behind it, a hollow. Inside, wrapped in decaying linen, was a bundle of bones no larger than a cat. But it wasn't an animal. Tiny fingers, a human jawbone, and braided through the remains black thread. As I stared, the humming returned, not in the air, but in my chest. A deep vibration pressing outward, as if something inside me was trying to sing. I reached for the bones, but stopped, because I realized something then. This wasn't just a haunting. This was an offering, a pact made in stone and thread and silence. And I had answered. I should have left, should have sealed the wall back up, walked away, and never looked back. But something about those bones so small, so delicate rooted me there. I sat on the cold floor of that forgotten study, the black thread still tangled around brittle finger bones. The weight of time and grief seemed pressed into that tiny skeleton, like the stone ranch had swallowed sorrow and let it ferment for 100 years. The humming was no longer subtle. It pulsed in the walls now, like a heartbeat out of sync with mine. I gathered the remains gently, wrapping them again in the cloth they came from, and stood. My limbs felt heavy, like the house didn't want me to leave. Or maybe something else didn't. The porcelain doll remained on the desk, unmoving. But now, its smile seemed wider, less like a child's toy, and more like something wearing a child's face. I looked around the room one last time. The photograph of Clara Whitmore still on the mantel had changed. I swear it had. Her eyes, once gazing off frame, were now staring directly into mine. I didn't breathe until I was outside. But the silence didn't greet me. The wind had died. The grass was still. Even the birds, those relentless little things that chirped endlessly each morning, had gone mute. I started the truck and left that place without looking back. But something followed. Over the next few weeks, things unraveled. My phone began recording at random hours, always around 3:33 a.m., capturing long strings of audio that sounded like wind or whispers. My dreams were filled with lullabies I'd never learned. Sometimes I'd wake to find black thread tangled around my fingers, once around my throat. I tried everything. Cleansing rituals, salt at the door, burning sage until the smoke stung my eyes. But this wasn't the kind of thing you shake off with candles and incense. It had been waiting too long, and I had brought it home. I returned to the archives, desperate to understand what this thing wanted. That's when I found one final letter undated, unsigned, but clearly written in the same hand as Clara Whitmore. It read, "She came in silence. She asked for nothing, only to be remembered. And when we wouldn't, she made sure we did." That was it. It wasn't vengeance. Not exactly. It was memory. The spirit, whatever it was, had fed off absence, off abandonment. The house had become its temple, the silence its shrine. And I'd been the first in decades to listen. I hadn't solved anything. I had awakened something that was merely sleeping. But that gave me a choice. So I did the only thing that made sense. I returned one last time. I buried the bones beneath the old cottonwood tree behind the house, the one that Clara had once planted when she arrived at the ranch, hopeful and full of light. I whispered apologies I wasn't sure she heard. I lit a candle, placed the doll beside it, and let the wind take the last of my words. The humming stopped that day. Not faded, stopped. I've never heard it since. Sometimes I wonder if the land simply swallowed the story again, like it did a century ago. But I don't think so, because now, when I drive past that stretch of Montana highway, the grass seems softer. The wind moves differently. And once, just once, I thought I saw a woman standing at the window of the ranch house. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just watched me go. And that was enough. Because some stories don't want to be told. They want to be heard. And now that I've told you hers, You'll hear her too. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but when the silence settles in too deep, when the hum beneath the floorboards doesn't match your own heart, when your phone starts recording things you didn't say, that's when you'll know. She remembers you.